There are stories about losing your home. This is a story about living long enough to see that home disappear. Long ago, when Ireland still belonged to the people of the old mounds and hidden hills, 4 children were condemned to live for 900 years in the bodies of swans. They endured a quiet lake, a murderous northern sea, and the lonely western edge of Ireland. They watched generations vanish. They returned at last to the house of their father and found no roof, no fire, and no living voice that remembered their names. Yet, that is not truly a story about magic. It is a story about jealousy, exile, the passing of time, and one sister who refused to let her brothers face the darkness alone. This is the fate of the Children of Lir. After the Tuatha De Danann had lost their open rule of Ireland, their nobles gathered to choose one king over them. Among those who believed the honour might fall to him was Lir, lord of the hidden dwelling at Fionnuala. But the kingship was given to Lough Derravaragh, son of Dagda. Lir left the assembly in anger. He offered no farewell and no promise of obedience. Some called for war, but Aodh refused. He would not turn a wounded pride into bloodshed. Then grief entered Lir's house. His wife died after short illness, and the proud lord who defied a king was almost broken by a loss he could not fight. Lough Derravaragh saw an opportunity for peace. He offered Lir a marriage alliance and invited him to choose among 3 noble sisters raised within his household. Lir chose the eldest, Aoife, and brought her home as his wife. In time, Aoife gave birth to twins, a daughter named Fionnuala and a son named Aodh. Later, she bore 2 more sons, Fiachra and Conn. But the second birth cost Aoife her life. Lir grieved again, yet the children became the centre of everything he had left. He slept near them. At dawn he would lie down among them. Lough Derravaragh, who had helped raise their mother, visited often, and when the children travelled to his house, the hall seemed brighter for their presence. No one who saw them could easily withhold affection for them. To preserve the alliance, Lir married Aoife's sister, Aoife. At first she treated the children with kindness. They were not strangers to her. They were the children of her own sister. But affection curdled into something darker. Everywhere Aoife looked, she saw Lir's devotion to them. Visitors came to see them. Their laughter filled this house. Their beds stood close to their father's, while Aoife began to feel that she occupied a place at the edge of his love. Jealousy rarely announces itself as cruelty. At first it whispers that we have been overlooked. Then it insists that another person's happiness has stolen something that belonged to us. Aoife listened until the whisper became the only voice she trusted. For nearly a year, Aoife claimed to be ill. During that time, she concealed what had formed in her mind. Then one morning, she ordered her chariot prepared and told the children they would visit Lough Derravaragh. Fionnuala hesitated. She had dreamed of treachery, and something in Aoife's manner frightened her, but she could not escape what had been already set in motion. On the road, Aoife turned to the servants and commanded them to kill the 4 children. She promised them any reward they desired. They refused. Whatever loyalty they owed Aoife ended at that demand. Aoife drew a sword herself. The children stood before her, defenceless. Yet she could not bring the blade down. Her failure did not restore her mercy. It merely changed the form of her revenge. She led the children westward to Lough Derravaragh, the lake now known as Lough Derravaragh. The water lay calm beneath the open sky. Aoife told them to enter the lake and bathe. The children went into the water. Aoife raised a druidic wand and struck them with the spell of transformation. 4 white swans rose where the children had been. Their bodies were feathered, their arms had become wings, and their feet moved beneath the dark water. But their minds remained human. They remembered their father. They understood what had been done to them, and when Fionnuala spoke, the voice that emerged from the swan was still her own. She told Aoife that the deed would be avenged and demanded that the curse be given an ending. Aoife answered with a sentence almost too vast for the children to understand. They would spend 300 years upon Lough Derravaragh, then 300 years on the Sea of Moyle, the dangerous water between Ireland and Scotland. Finally, they would endure 300 years around the western lands of Eris and Lough. No friend and no power of the old world could restore them before that time had passed. Perhaps some remnant of shame stirred within Aoife, because she granted them 3 mercies. They would keep their reason, they would retain human speech, and they would sing music more beautiful than any heard in Ireland. Then she left them on the lake. Aoife arrived at Aodh Derravarag's dwelling without the children and tried to place the blame upon Lir. But her story did not survive the first questions. Messengers rode north. Lir learned that his children had never reached their destination, and before another day had passed he was searching the road himself. At the shore of Lough Derravaragh, he saw 4 swans moving towards him. Then he heard Fionnuala call her brothers by name. Lir stopped at the water's edge. Fionnuala told him the truth. They were his children, ruined by Aoife's jealousy. Lir asked the only question a father could ask. Could the spell be undone? It could not. Lir remained beside them as long as he could. Aodh Derravaragh came with the people of the Tuatha De Danann, and others travelled from across Ireland to hear the swans speak and sing. Their music brought rest to the sick and peace to the grieving. When Bodh confronted Aoife, he asked what shape she would hate most to wear. She answered, a demon of the air. He transformed her into that form, and she was driven away upon the wind. But punishing Aoife did not release the children. For 300 years, the shore of Lough Derravaragh remained a place where the old world could still reach them. Their father could hear them. Their people knew where to find them. They were swans, but they were not yet alone. Then Fionnuala told her brothers that their first term had ended. Aodh, Fiachra and Conn wept. The lake had become almost a home because love still waited upon its shore. The Sea of Moyle promised only rock, salt and storm. The 4 swans said farewell to their father and rose into the northern sky. Lir watched until the white shapes vanished from sight. The Sea of Moyle was nothing like the sheltered lake. Currents pulled between Ireland and Scotland. Winter winds drove wave across the rocks, and there was no friendly shore upon which their people waited. One night Fionnuala saw a storm approaching. She told her brothers that the wind might scatter them, and they agreed that if they were separated, they would return to Seal Rock. At midnight the storm struck. The sea rose beneath them. The lightning opened the darkness for an instant and closed it again. The swans were torn apart, each driven across the water without knowing whether the others still lived. When calm finally returned, Fionnuala was alone. Through the remaining night she watched every direction. She called for her brothers, but only the sea answered. For the first time since the spell began, she believed that the curse might have taken them from her one by one. At dawn, a shape appeared low upon the water. It was Conn, exhausted and drenched. Then Fiachra arrived, so cold that his voice could barely be understood. Fionnuala drew them beneath her wings. Still, Aoife was missing. At last they saw him coming towards the rock. Fionnuala placed Aoife against her breast, Fiachra beneath her right wing, and Conn beneath her left. She warned them that the storm they had survived would not be the last. Another winter froze them to the rock. Their feathers, wings and feet adhered to the ice. When they tore themselves free, they left feathers and skin behind. Salt water entered these wounds, and yet the curse compelled them to return to the sea. They endured until their feathers grew again. By day they sometimes approached the coasts of Ireland or Scotland. By night they returned to the water appointed for their exile. Once they met riders from the old people and asked about their father. Lir still lived then, surrounded by his household, grieving because he did not know where the sea had carried them. The children remembered the soft beds of their youth, the drinking cups, the bright halls, and the sound of familiar voices. Their bed now was rock, their clothing was wet feathers, their drink was the bitter sea. Yet, whenever the youngest weakened, Fionnuala opened her wings. For 300 years she became the shelter that the world no longer offered them. When the years upon the Moyle were finished, the swans flew west towards Erris, on the coast of what is now County Mayo. Their final 3 centuries would be spent among remote headlands, islands, and the full force of the Atlantic. There they met a young man named Aberic, who listened to their singing and loved them. According to the old tale, it was he who gathered the story of their sufferings so that it might be remembered. But the West offered no easy ending. One terrible winter froze the water between Erris and Achill. The swans were trapped upon the ice, and the brothers cried out in thirst and fear. Time had begun to change more than the children. The world of the Tuatha De Danann was fading. New peoples, new beliefs, and new voices had entered Ireland, while the 4 swans remained bound to the same ancient sentence. At last, the 900 years were nearly complete. Fionnuala told her brothers that they should return once more to the house of Lir. They rose with hope. Perhaps they imagined their father waiting at the door. Perhaps after so long, hope itself had become a kind of memory. They found no welcoming household. The roof was gone. Nettles grew where fires had once burned. The halls that had held music, feasting, and the laughter of children were empty ruins beneath the sky. No hounds ran to meet them. No riders crossed the grass. No living person knew them. Lir was dead. Aodh Derravaragh was gone. Everyone who had loved the children belonged to a world that had passed away. The curse had not merely taken their human bodies, it had forced them to outlive home itself. The 4 swans remained there for one night, singing among the ruins. Then they flew west again to Lough. One morning, a sound crossed the island that the swans had never heard before. A small bell rang for prayer. Aodh, Fiachra and Conn started in fear and flew from Fionnuala. But she understood that this unfamiliar music belonged to the new age that had come to Ireland. The bell belonged to a holy man named Muchamich. When he heard the swans singing, he came to the water and asked if they were the children of Lir. They placed themselves under his protection. He had 2 light silver chains made, one joining Fionnuala with Aoife, and the other joining Fiachra with Conn, so that the 4 would never again be separated. For a time they knew peace. But word of the marvellous swans reached Aoife, wife of Largan, king of Connaught. She demanded that the birds be brought to her. The holy man refused to surrender them. Largan came himself. In anger, he seized the swans from the altar, 2 in each hand. At his touch, the feathers fell away. The spell was broken at last, but did not return 4 young children. 900 years descended upon them in a single moment. Before the astonished king stood 3 frail old men and 1 withered old woman, their bodies barely able to hold the lives that endured for so long. Fionnuala knew that death was close. She asked Muchamich to baptize them and then to bury them together. Conn was to lie at her right, Fiachra at her left, and Aoife above her, held between her arms as he had once sheltered beneath her feathers. The 4 were baptized, then, together at last in human form, they died. They were placed in one grave according to Fionnuala's wish, and their names were marked above them. The holy man mourned. The Children of Lir is often remembered as a beautiful story about 4 swans, but beauty is only its outer shape. At its heart is a family destroyed by jealousy and held together by loyalty. Aoife uses power to isolate the children from everyone who loves them. Time then completes when the spell began, removing their father, their people, and even the world to which they hope to return. Against that loss stands Fionnuala. She cannot break the curse, she cannot calm the sea or stop 9 centuries from passing. What she can do is keep calling her brothers' names. She can wade through the storms, she can cover them with her wings, she can make certain that sufferings does not force them to suffer alone. Perhaps that is why the story endured, not because it promises that every wrong will be undone. The children's youth is never restored, and their old home never rises again. It endures because even when everything familiar is lost, love can remain an act of shelter. On the lake, on the northern sea, and at the far western edge of Ireland, 4 white swans stayed together, while one age ended and another began, and their names were not forgotten.